right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Today is Tuesday, October 25th, 2022, and this is a study session of the Governing Board of the Litchfield Elementary School District. This study session is hereby called to order. The first item on the study session agenda this evening
Today
is item
is
1B,
Tuesday, October
National
25th,
Board Certified Teacher
2022,
Presentation,
and this is a
which
study
will
session
be
of the
presented
Governing
by
Board of the Litchfield
Julie Larson,
Elementary School
Allison
District.
Paterno, Miriam
This study
Wilson
session is hereby called to
Welcome.
order.
The first
right, thank
item
you.
on the study session
Welcome,
agenda this
everyone.
evening
Today
is item
is
1B,
Tuesday, October
National
25th,
Board Certified Teacher
2022,
Presentation,
and this is a
which
study
will
session
be
of the
presented
Governing
by
Board
Please
of the
hold for
Litchfield
Larson,
Elementary School
Allison
District.
Paterno, Miriam. Okay, we're ready to continue. Thank you.
Sure, there you go. Thank you so much for having us here today. It's to share an update about our LESD National Board cohort. My name is Miriam Wilson. I'm a fifth grade teacher at Palm Valley Elementary School. Julie Larson wasn't able to join us today. She's a math specialist. And
I'm Allison Paterno. I'm the district literacy coach. And again, thank you for having us today to talk a little bit more about our National Board Certified Teacher Program. We're here tonight because we wanted to really cover 4 things with you. One, we wanted to just help you understand more about what National Board Certification is, how it works here in Litchfield, what our impact and vision for our program is, and also how we might be able to partner more closely with you as our governing board. So what is National Board Certification? National Board Certification is the most respected professional certification available in education, and it provides numerous benefits to teachers, students, and schools. It was designed to develop, retain, and recognize accomplished teachers and to generate ongoing improvement in schools nationwide. We included in the board docs an additional handout, the one that's titled National Board Certification, What is it? We'll provide a little bit more information on that. But basically there are 4 components that each candidate will go through. The first component is an assessment that they'll have to sit for. It's much like the AEPA, where they'll have to answer a series of questions that are multiple choice, and then also respond to some open-ended questions. Then the next 3 components are going to be portfolio entries. Component 2 is about differentiation and instruction. Component 3 is where they would submit some videos and reflect on those videos to show how they instruct in their classroom. And component 4 is about their PLC and their leadership. So how they're really using data to make sure that they're meeting the needs of students as well as needs of teachers. So how does National Board Certification align to our strategic plan? It highly aligns to the people pillar. There are 2 goals that Superintendent Gunning is focusing on this year. One is to maintain high retention rates of employees. Thank you. And the second is to grow and develop leadership at all levels. So our strategic plan alignment, there's another handout that's in the board docs. It's going to show that, that in Litchfield, we have our current National Board certified teachers that hold a variety of high-level positions in our district, and also have received several awards that are really promoting high levels of learning in our campuses. You'll also see on that handout that there are 22 candidates that are part of our cohort now, and that grew from when Miriam and I were just the only 2 of us, so it's really grown recently. And then you'll also see on there that there are now 12 of our 16 campuses that either have a National Board Certified teacher or a candidate on them. It also aligns to our student success pillar. The goal that Superintendent Gunning is focusing on this year is to foster academic excellence and innovation for all students. So what we did is we just pulled some Acadience data for a kindergarten teacher, as well as for a 5th grade teacher who were candidates in the National Board Certified Teacher Program. So if you're looking on the left-hand side for the kinder teacher, what we did is we looked at last year's data, and we saw at the beginning of the year in 21-22, the National Board candidate, she started with 60% of her students who were at or above benchmark. By the end of the year, she was at 75% of her students who were at or above benchmark on Acadience, with a growth of 15%. When we compared that to her grade level peers on the same campus, they started at 61.5% of their students at or above benchmark. They ended the year with 67% with a growth of 5.5. So you can see that she outperformed her peers. On the higher level grades, higher grade levels, what we did is we compared this teacher from before she started the process to after she started the process. In 2017-18, that was the year before she started the process, she ended the year with 82% of her students at or above benchmark on Acadians. The next year, when she began the National Board Certified Teacher process, she ended the year with 96% of her students. So we can see that it was making a really significant impact on student success.
So that data that we showed you is not surprising. There have been many studies, there's research to back, and some of those are linked in those handouts that are in your notes, that National Board Certified Teachers, when students are in front of National Board Certified Teachers, they tend to grow and outperform their peers who do not have a National Board Certified Teacher in front of them. They learn more and have a deeper learning and evidence of deeper learning, nearly 3 times more frequently than their peers. In addition, the positive impact of having a board certified teacher is even greater for minority and low income students. So they've done many, there's research to back up just how impactful it is to have an MBCT in front of these students. The average growth is 1 to 2 months of additional learning compared to their peers. So they've kind of equated that. So you can only imagine if a student was able to have an MBCT in every single grade they go through, the kind of growth they would be able to have by the time they leave us. So we know that we want MBCTs. And so this is what is offered as incentives to go through this rigorous process. So we've kind of laid out some of our neighbors, and then here in Litchfield, what our current incentive is. We have a $1,000 a year stipend that's given to our MBCTs. And our neighboring districts, for example, Avondale gives a $3,000, Littleton has a $4,800, Kyrene is at $2,000. So just kind of giving you some of that information about what's comparable and what those compensations look like in our neighbors.
Said get close. That's what he told me. You sure? How did we come up with $1,000? Does anybody remember?
I think that was pre all of us, actually. I think that was before any of us were in these roles, actually.
Yeah, this is the
And we
first.
just haven't changed it now.
Okay, this is the first time that this has been brought back to the board since when? 2015?
Much longer.
2012?
It used to be in the old process, it used to be a 10-year certificate that you would hold. And so those individuals would get a $10,000 stipend at the time of certification. And then there wasn't a yearly stipend. It was a one-time stipend. And then that changed, I think, right before we certified. So that would have been in 2015, 16, somewhere around there, that it changed to the yearly stipend instead of the one time. Okay, so we just kind of laid out what that would look like. So the average stipend with those kind of neighboring districts is $2,525. So we put on here 15 teachers. We currently have 12 MBCTs. However, we very much anticipate, crossing our fingers, that come December, we will have at least 15. We have 4 teachers waiting scores right now. So come December, we are hoping to add to that number. So we used the number 15 just to give you a more accurate number of what that might represent. So currently that's a cost of $15,000 a year at our $1,000 stipend. And then to match the average of our peers, that would be $37,875 a year. To match some of those more comparable districts and more of the higher end, such as Avondale at $3,000, that would put $45,000 as the yearly cost to increase that stipend. So
we really are here just seeking ways that we might be able to partner more closely with you. One of those ways is that we are hoping you might be able to help us find more teachers who are wanting to pursue this process of national board certification. So we invite you to join us at any of our events. Our cohort meets once a month, and these teachers get together and they just work on their component work. They reflect on their practice, and they think about how they can bring what they're learning through this reflective and rigorous process back to their classrooms and children. So we invite you to join us for any of those that we meet, like I said, once a month. Also considering pathways to leadership. So if there are ever projects or initiatives that are coming across and are on your radar, please think of our National Board Certified Teachers and candidates about how they might be able to help get those initiatives going on their campuses and in our district so that they may be able to find some pathways to leadership.
And then obviously the stipend and benefits to our MBCTs. We are actively recruiting teachers. And as we all know, there's a lot on plates right now. And so to get teachers to really sign on to such a rigorous process, we know it's powerful and they know it's powerful, but it's a lot. So just providing some of those incentives to have them join us and grow this cohort. We've done a great job up until now, and we've doubled in size almost every year for the last 2 years. It's been really exciting, but I think we are kind of at that spot where to get to the growth that we really want to see, there needs to be a little bit of an incentive there. We did have an increase this year for coaching. So we're now able to have 3 coaches, which we very much appreciate. We were able to add on a 3rd coach because our cohort has grown. As a coaching position, we're helping them go through pages and pages of writing and coaching them through the videos, and it's really labor intensive. So being able to add that on and have that stipend added for that coach was extremely helpful. But we would like to be competitive with those districts around us. And if we have MBCTs coming into the state and into the area, we want them to be able to look to our district and know that we hold MBCTs at that high level and are providing that incentive to come to LASD.
So really 3 things that we're wanting to focus on as we move forward. One is increased participation in our national board program. We're really hoping to have at least 20 candidates in our cohort and sustain that in the years to come. Improve support for our national board certified teachers, including continuing our partnership with the Arizona K-12 Center for this work. And the 3rd is those enticing benefits and meaningful leverage of our national board certified teachers so that they're getting both the compensation as well as those pathways for leadership.
As far as who's impacted, all staff members who choose to participate in the process, as well as those benefiting from the leadership of an MBCT. The component 4 is all about leadership. So there are so many others who are impacted by these national board certified candidates going through the process because they're pushed to branch out and step up and find needs and fill needs as part of that component 4. So not just those teachers, but their campuses, the district are also impacted by the process. All students being taught by an MBCT, we see the research, we know that that's true, and as well as those being taught by a teacher influenced by an MBCT. And then we just want to leave you with some testimonials of a couple of our candidates and how it has impacted their practice. The first is from I believe a 3rd grade teacher. My experience with the National Board Certification process has provided a plethora of mentoring, support, collaboration, and financial assistance for my district and MBCT cohort. The MBCT journey has allowed me to closely examine my own teaching practices to determine my own strengths and weaknesses in the classroom. It has also allowed me to reflect, adjust, and validate what I do every day for my students. And then from a special needs candidate. Completing the 4 national board certification components directly impacted my instructional practice more than any other class or professional development I've ever participated in. The components directly related to everything I was already doing in the classroom, however, challenged me to analyze, evaluate, and reflect on my planning, teaching types and strategies, evaluation practices, and content knowledge deeper than I even knew was possible. The process and workload was grueling and is only completed by educators fully committed to elevating their education and willing to put in countless hours beyond the regular workday. The best part for me is knowing who will be directly positively impacted by my efforts, students. And at this time, we're open for any questions that you may have.
Yes, I have. I want to go back to the slide where you're asking for ways the governing board can help. So I want to address these with my thoughts and opinions, and then we can hear from other board members as well. So the first ask here, which is for us to join any of your meetings and events. My suggestion for that would be, because we have rules we have to follow, we can't be in the same place at the same time. If you would take a look at your calendar and invite each of us separately to maybe the next 5 things you have going on, next events, that would be great. We can maybe swap amongst ourselves if we figure out something that we can't go to, but that would probably be the most effective way to get it on our calendar and make sure that we're following all the rules. The leveraging of the initiatives pursued by the governing board. So one of our big initiatives is our systems analysis. So I don't know if this would be a task that those of you who already have this designation would do, if Mr. Owen would do this, or if Jody or someone on her team, Superintendent Gunning's team, would do this. But you gave us some data, a couple of small pieces of data. A bigger analysis on the impact of this in our district, I think specifically, would be great in order for us to say, hands down, no doubt about it, this is a program that impacts student success. That will help us, I think, be able to knowingly allocate more of a stipend as well, because we are big now. We have been, but we're big now into the evidence piece of it. So what you showed is a great starting point, but I think if we can get more data behind that, that would be great. And I don't know about what our options are with increasing the stipend today, or if it's something, we're not taking any action tonight, obviously, but if it's something we should talk about in the budget for next year, or what Executive Director Vaughn might think about, or Superintendent Gunning might think about the timing for that.
That's what we were thinking, is that we'll bring back all the different options of things that, we'll be talking about over the next several months, right? So that way, when it comes to those budget discussions, you can help us narrow down where the focus needs to be. And this definitely could be one of them.
Yeah, obviously, attracting great teachers and retaining great teachers is one of our priorities. So I definitely want to see this on the list, and competitive with what other districts are paying, especially Avondale. I'd like to beat them, of course, but that's me personally. So I'll open up the floor to any other comments or questions.
That was my first thought too. I was like, I don't like us to be underpaying anybody in our area. We have to be the best. So I did want to ask about your leadership and growth opportunities. It's on the next slide after this one, I think. Can you tell me what that would look like for you? Can you explain to me what you mean by that for offering that?
Yeah, so a couple of things that we've thrown out, a couple of things that we have as ideas are things like new teacher mentoring. We know that when teachers enter the profession, they need someone who has been in the profession and someone who is accomplished in their field to be able to kind of come along aside them. And we don't have a formal mentoring program in our district, but it would be a way that we might be able to leverage our national board certified teachers to assume that leadership role and provide some coaching and support to those teachers who are new to us. So that's just one idea. It may be too that they may be content leads. So like we have a candidate who's going through this as an exceptional needs specialist. And so she may be able to partner with our special education department to provide some coaching and support to teachers who are in the special education realm, and just needing someone who's kind of living it every day, not in a coaching role, but just someone who's also walking that walk.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question on slide 12. I think it's the second to the last. Third to the last.
The vision and timeline?
The vision and timeline.
Oh, okay.
There you go. On the question I have is additional coach. How many coaches do we have now? Do we have any?
Yep. We were able to add a third. So this, we can actually check that one off. That was a part of our original goals. We were able to add that third coach this year. So we currently have 3 coaches for our cohort in LASD.
Do they get more money than the $1,000 for being?
Not currently. No, the stipend is $1,000 for each coach. So that was increased. It was split between coaches before. So Allison and myself were splitting the $600 stipend before. So that was increased this year to $1,000.
So it's still the same $1,000 stipend.
It's an addition because we're also MBCTs. So we also get the $1,000 a year for maintaining our certificate as well.
Okay.
And we've chosen, we use it as our teacher leader project. So we actually don't take part in that stipend. She and I don't, but our newest coach does.
How do we make sure that these national certified teachers stay with us? We go through the process of helping these individuals, great individuals, by the way. I'm familiar with the program.
Thank you.
And then I just hope you stick around for a while.
That's our goal. And we've tried we started this with, like she said, there were just 2 of us in the
Yeah.
cohort, and we've
I believe it.
grown, and we had, I think, only 3 schools represented whenever we first started, got into our second year, and we're now at 12 of our schools have either a candidate or an MBCT. So we really are trying to get that impact, because we've seen once there's an MBCT at a school, they are able to step up in that leadership role, demonstrate the things that they've learned, and others kind of come along. So
Super. That's all I got.
thank you.
I have a couple of questions. You said earlier the certification was 10 years. Is that still, or was that previously?
That was the previous, it was a much more rigorous process. So even more so than the one now. They had to complete it in 1 year.
Okay.
They didn't have the 3-year process. So it was only about a 30 or 40% success rate in that first year. And unfortunately, we're still kind of fighting against some of those feelings and beliefs from that first way. Whenever people hear about it, they hear horror stories about having to do all 4 components in 1 year. It's now able to be spread over 3 years and has a much better success rate. It's much more manageable, but the certificate is only good for 5 years now. So it needs to be maintained every 5 years. And so for example, we have 4 candidates right now who are going through maintenance of certificates, so MOC. Every 5 years now, they have to do basically 1 component, just showing how they've stepped up in those leadership roles and how they've continued their learning and continued to just push themselves to be those accomplished teachers.
Okay. That's still a lot though, every 5 years.
It
I mean,
is.
it's,
It is.
you get through the first round and,
Right.
Maintenance is still sounds like a heck of a process. So
It's still a little bit, yes.
quite a lot. I also, Jody, I agree with you that possibly looking at the stipend sort of in whole of the budget of what we currently pay for other things. I mean, I know we've looked at stipends for anything from, additional hours for site supervisors and, coaches and all kinds of things that are in addition to $1,000. And I think that if we have programs that show direct student success in academics, that we should be prioritizing that from a dollar standpoint, not only in support from the district. One other thing I thought of as you were going through, first of all, fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. I love the ways that we can help, because I think a lot of times we walk away thinking, wow, that was really great, but now what? Like, what do the 5 of us do to actually help you? And I think these were really great ways. So thank you for pointing that out. One other thing I was thinking is, now that we have the sort of permanent guest teacher on every campus, is it possible, while I know right now they're working probably on a daily basis and hard to fill in, but as that evens out, is there any support the district can provide in days or time when teachers need just extra time? So you're not working nights and weekends consistently, because we're the ones benefiting from it. The students are benefiting from it. So is there any way possible that there could be some assistance from the district in terms of taking that time? I'm speaking totally out of turn, just FYI, and all of these guys are going, please tell her to stop talking. But that might be another way that we could provide support. So just think about that, what that might look like, even if it was a half day or something like that, where they could take time to do that work, and the district could support in that way. And it's very small financial impact, probably a pretty big impact on their life and being able to work through those things during the day versus nights and weekends.
I will say we actually were able to write some of this into grant, and we're given 2 PD days per
Yeah,
candidate,
great.
and it has meant the world to them. So we were actually, we originally had some things and we were trying to cut it down a little bit. We did a kickoff for the entire cohort. So we came together in September for a full day. We had breakout sessions, we had individual coaching sessions. They had the whole day to just sit and kind of wrap their brain around what it meant to do this. And then we have another one planned for February too. So that's been, you're right, time is what it comes down to. And it's been amazing.
And I'd love to know more ways that we can do that. Like you said, this
you guys don't finish this in just a month, right? And this is a year-long
Yeah,
process
right.
that you take plus the maintenance. So over time, there may be additional opportunities that the district can support in that way. So be thinking about that and don't be afraid to ask or to speak up. One thing, Dennis, you asked about how do we, once we get teachers to go through the process, how do we retain them? Number one, I think having this cohort, I don't know if every district does this, but having this sort of support mechanism, these group of people that are here seems pretty fantastic. If I was a teacher and I knew that I had a dozen people that were willing to meet on a monthly basis to help me through this process, I think my buy-in would be a lot stronger than if I had to do it on my own. You also mentioned that the stipend before was given away in one lump sum. I think I do agree that we probably need to strengthen that stipend, but I'm more in favor of doing it year over year so that we get the benefit every year, so that they want to come back and work here, not just because they love this district, but they're also getting maybe a higher stipend than our competing districts. But we're still getting the benefit versus paying out the $10,000 or $15,000 up front. And then, the next year they leave and go someplace else. That doesn't really help our students all that much. So I'm in favor of a higher stipend, but I'd like to see it paid out year to year versus in a lump sum, just to help that retention effort.
While we are the lowest in the amount that we get, we are one of the highest in terms of number of candidates. So that information
Yeah.
wasn't in there, but we can definitely share that out with you in terms of K-8 districts. We're second in the state as far as number of candidates. We've grown it that much in the last few years. So comparatively to
Right.
Avondale and other districts, we do have quite a cohort. And
Yeah. We'll
can
see.
be
We're still on
proud
the
of that.
top, ladies. Don't worry. My competitive board members down here that are wanting to up the ante. But yeah, and I agree with Kim, first of all, on, getting things on our calendar. I know we can't all 5 attend everything, but, working through Superintendent Gunning's office and Amy getting things on our calendar, I would love to just see the process and help us better understand what you're doing, how you're doing, which would be wonderful. And second thing that I can't now remember because I obviously wasn't important. I apologize. I can't. But anyway, thank you. This was really an awesome presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, I do know what it was. You can still go to your seats. It's more to Superintendent Gunning. I think, Kim, the piece you were talking about, the example sort of data point on here was great. I think seeing that across the board and all of the teachers and all of the candidates would be really impressive and really make the case for whether it be additional stipends or additional PD days or whatever that total cost is to the district in terms of soft costs as well as fixed cost, would be much easier, right, to just slide right through seeing that data and seeing the actual, student success and the student growth off of that. So I think reviewing that in total when we go through the budgeting process would make that really easy.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks again. Next, we will move on to item 1C, student data and assessment, measuring, monitoring, and evaluating student learning, presented by Director Owens.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Madam Superintendent. We do want to provide you an update with some data that we have not presented to you yet. Some of the data in here we have, but some we have not. So introduce myself, Brian Owen, Director of Assessment Accountability for Litchfield. I always like to start by restating what the department mission and vision are. Our mission is to provide the highest quality district assessments data and academic achievement information to all district staff by ensuring alignment to state expectations, providing the highest quality data and professional development, and delivering the most informative measures of student academic growth. This slide just sort of categorizes some of the main components of our department duties and how they fit into our 4 pillars of success, including the people pillar, which is getting people involved in the creation and implementation of new assessments, which we have been doing. We're going to administer a new winter assessment in January. We've been creating those the last couple of weeks and have had groups come in to do that. So I'd like to start with presenting state assessment results. We have new state data. The Department of Ed has released the state public data file, which has other district proficiency rates in it, plus subgroup rates. But first, I'd like to review some of the information that we've already presented. This is a 4-year proficiency trend in Litchfield by grade and content going back to 2018. And you can see in general, the pattern is decrease in 2021, increase in 2022. There's a decrease in fifth grade ELA, increases across the board in math. And as we talked about this summer, that was where Litchfield saw the greatest increases. Here's a comparison to statewide proficiency. The gap between Litchfield and the state is anywhere from positive 5 percentage points up to 21 percentage points in fifth grade math, which is where Litchfield saw the greatest gains. And our subgroup proficiency over the last 3 state data points. This is ELA. In general, the trend is very similar to all students. A decrease seen in spring of 2021 and a subsequent increase the following year in the spring of 2022. And here's math. So the release of the state data file has allowed us to make some comparisons to state demographics. I've actually made this change on my copy already, but in my haste, as I was very quickly putting these charts together, notice I accidentally highlighted both in red there in the free and reduced. Litchfield's should be red, state should be blue, which is on the right. I fixed it in mine and we'll get it updated. But you can see here in nearly every reportable subgroup, Litchfield's proficiency rates are higher than the state's. And I want to make a comment here. The state made a change in how they reported data this year. So in 2021, by subgroup, what they did was they aggregated numbers up to all assessments in math and ELA. In 2022, they did not. So for subgroup data, everything is reported by grade and content. So you'll have a grade 3 ELA, a grade 4 ELA, a grade 5 ELA. The reason why that's significant is because when you get down to that minute of a level, the N counts decrease drastically. And so if there's not enough students that are proficient in that particular grade and content area that is reported by the state, a proficiency rate cannot be reported. So the way that I aggregate up across grade levels is I just simply take the 2 columns that they have, which is students number tested and percent proficient, and multiply. So I create a number proficient in each grade to aggregate it across grade levels. So if I don't have the percent proficient, I can't aggregate. So there are some that are not reported. This is ELA comparison. Here's a math comparison. You can see we did have the data to be able to compare our ELL subgroup to the state and the Hawaiian Native Pacific Islander subgroup. Other comparisons that we're able to do is, and we like to do this, we compare Litchfield to other districts in the state. That's sort of another way that we like to measure our success as a district, is not only to statewide averages, but does Litchfield compare to other districts? So we've separated these out into the groups that we've spoken about since the summer and into grade bands, the 3-5 and the 6-8 grade band, rather than looking overall across all of 3-8. The first district group we'll look at is the Attorney General's peer group, which is made up of 4 districts, including Litchfield. The criteria for this particular peer group for achievement data, must be elementary, and the municipalities are less than 16% poverty rate in the district's municipalities. I just went ahead and rank ordered them, highest to lowest in descending order there. So you can see top 4 ELA, bottom 4 math. And this is what grades 6 through 8 look like.
I have a question. Attorney General's peer group, I'm not familiar with that term.
Well, it's the group of districts. So there are different groups that the Attorney General uses depending on the analysis that they're reporting out. And I see it in the annual report.
I'm sorry, I think it's the Auditor General. I
I'm
think
sorry.
that might be the confusion. It's the Auditor
The
General.
Auditor General, sorry. That's, again, in my haste.
Minor detail, okay.
Yep,
We don't want anything to do with the Attorney General.
no, we don't. I apologize. That's me. I don't think Auditor General when I think AG. No reason in particular. I just, yes, I'm sorry. I'll get that fixed too. Did not notice that. That is one peer group that we'll compare to. The second group of districts we like to compare ourselves to just to see how we're doing in our area is a West Valley district comparison. We've defined 10 West Valley districts. I can say Saddle Mountain Unified did not have enough students to be included in this particular comparison in the public data file in any of the 4 categories. So here are the 9 that were reported in ELA and math in rank order. Highest to lowest, grade 3.5 ELA, grade 3.5 math. And then 6.8. In addition to Saddle Mountain in grade 6.8 ELA, Littleton, Buckeye, and Pendergast were also not reportable for grade 6.8 grade band and ELA.
So Director Owen, when you say not reportable, that means they didn't have enough students that even were on the proficiency scale?
Well, that measured proficient on the test. So yeah, it could have been proficient or highly proficient, but the number of students in that were in the percent pass was not high enough to publicly report that percentage. So it could be
Okay.
the N count in general, because there are some smaller districts for sure,
Yeah.
is small if you have only 25 students in a grade level compared to 400.
Okay, thank you.
And then the other thing that we wanted to look at was compared to higher scoring districts overall in the whole state. So not just West Valley or our Auditor General's peer group. We want to see what are the highest scoring districts in the state. We've always known Litchfield is one of the highest scoring districts in the state overall. But the first analysis here, what I did was I wanted to look at similar districts of similar size. So in the grades 3.5 and 6.8 grade band, Litchfield has just over about 3,100 students tested. So what I did was I just put an N count range on that from greater than 1,000 in this grade band and less than 6,000 students tested, and what the proficiency rates for those districts were. And again, I'm looking for a more comparable size district here. And when it says 39 total districts, that means 39 total districts that meet the criteria of N count number tested greater than 1,000, less than 6,000, and had enough students proficient in each of the grades and content to be reported. That's 3.5 ELA. Here's 3.5 math. There are 4 of these in this criteria. Six, 8 ELA and 6.8 math. And then, of course, I wanted to just take out the number tested criteria. So if I did not limit the district's size in terms of student count, what does that ranking then look like? This is first 135 ELA. A total of 78 met the criteria. 35 math. And then the last two analyses, 6-8 ELA, which has a total of 70 districts that were reported in the public file. And 6-8 math. And I do have the complete list here, so I can always send those.
Okay, so Mr. Owen, when I look at the highest scoring for 3 through 5 and 6 through 8, when we're looking at the full list, and I look at our ranking compared to the number of districts, we are in the top 20% of districts in the state. Does that seem accurate to you? So for example, if I say on the slide 24 in the math 6 through 8, we are ranked number 15 and there's 75 districts. So we're at the 20% cutoff of that. So we would be in the top 20% of districts in the state.
Well, is that really accurate though? Because that's taking into only the schools that actually had data to be able to report. So there's plenty of schools that didn't have enough kids to even be able to report the data.
Correct.
Thus, that would make us higher than 20% if we really included all the school districts that were testing their kids.
Well, it depends. It may. It depends on if we really looked at those proficiency rates, if we could, were they lower or higher? Because you're right, there's a good number of more districts out there, but if they're ranked lower, that would.
But these, I mean, when you look at the schools on these lists, these are the schools that we know are the highest performing districts in the state. I mean, you're not going to have a small district, slip in there, generally speaking. So, there's been some talk about Litchfield, becoming a destination district. I think this only reiterates the fact that we have been and continue to be a destination district, despite what our scores show from the pandemic. We are one of the top performing districts in the state, and we have been. And
Yes.
I think this is excellent. I am so ecstatic to see these numbers and to see the hard work of our teachers and staff be validated by these numbers. Are the numbers where we want them to be? Do we want more students to be proficient? Yes, we do. We all want that. But especially during the last couple of years, information came out, I think today or yesterday, from nationwide, showing the data from schools and what the last couple of years have impacted as well on those levels. And I'm just really pleased. I could be more pleased, but I'm really pleased that we are showing positive growth and that we are keeping up, if not surpassing, our peers when it comes to closing that gap, that learning gap.
Thank you for saying that. I have been saying that Litchfield is one of the top scoring districts in the state for a long time. I appreciate it.
Any other board member questions or comments?
It's interesting to see the difference though, or really the lack of difference, to be honest, between what I would consider our peer groups, which is, the greater than 1,000, less than 6,000, right? The similar size group districts. And then when you went to the entire sort of 78 total districts, it's just not that far off. There's just not that many others that are added to that list. So it seems like sort of our similar size is the, sort of at the top of that heap for the most part, versus, maybe a few more that are greater in size than us. But it's interesting to see that the schools are very, very similar on both of those lists. There's not a lot of addition there to those lists.
So then I want to move on from the state test results to our district assessment results. We have not presented these yet. We are done taking our pretest or our fall test. We started the first week of school and tested throughout August with our brand new system and brand new tests. So I want to reiterate our timeline. I know you've seen this a couple of different times, and now in addition, the August 2022 time point. And this is important to me because this really impacts the comparability of the data that we're getting, which impacts the meaning of that data. So just to quickly go through, 4 years ago in August 2018, we had a test, and in math and reading is what I'm going to refer to as the full battery. It was 55 to 60 items. In fact, one of those tests was 63 items, and students took a long time to test. Summer of 2019, we revised K-8 pre-post math tests and second grade reading tests. Those assessments were up for revisions, of course. Then in August 2019, which is the following August for the 1920 school year, those assessments, which were revised, administered for the first time. So they were not overhauled completely. Some changed more than others, but still impacted the comparability of even August 19 to August 18. But we could get somewhat of an idea. March of 2020 faced school closures. Summer of 2020, with all of the unknowns looming, we decided to shorten those assessments to 30 items. So that really was, we wanted students to spend more time learning, less time testing. Students came back in person October 2020. They were administered that 30-item test in math and reading grades 3 through 8 only for the very first time. And then August 2021, we administered the same 30-item tests in grades 3 through 8 math and reading in August 2021. Problem was, those are two very different time points. And so comparability in August 2021 was impacted. August 2022, which was this school year, we have all brand new assessments in grades K-8 and 2-8. Just quickly give you an overview of our district assessment calendar this year as we implement the new system. Our pre-post tests, those tests will all be 40 items in K-8 and 2 through 8. Then we are going to administer mid-year assessments in 2 through 8 math and reading. That'll be about mid-January. Those tests will be 30 items. They're being created right now, well, during this month. And grades 3 through 8, we're experimenting with different item types. So previously, our district assessment items had been all multiple choice, 4 choices, except for kinder. That was a little bit different. But all the others were all multiple choice. We're experimenting with some multi-select items and some open-ended items that are machine scored. So those we stick to whole number answers for right now. And all of them are going to be able to be administered both online and on paper. So for grades first and second, which some in the fall administered all online. Students did not take paper in some schools, and in others, students did take them on paper. So let's look at how the scores came out.
Wait, before
Oh.
you go on, can I just ask a quick question about that?
Yes.
Because I've actually had some parents ask me and I don't know the answer. What is the distinction between the online test and a paper test? How is it selected? Which schools, which grades? What is the sort of the theory behind that, and is it done by sort of the IT connectivity, what we can do, or is it selected by how we think the kids are going to perform best?
For our district tests, the sites could make their own decision. Some just wanted to go forward on without paper and Scantron, because it is pretty time consuming to bubble those Scantrons after students test. And with this new system, it's live, it's real time. So if students are testing directly on the computer, that data is available immediately. So that was one thing they didn't want to, some schools did not want to wait 2 weeks to bubble all the scan sheets, send them to me to be scanned in and then uploaded. So this, for our district assessment, that was site-based this year. And so some sites, 3 offhand that I can think of, really wanted to see how first and second graders would do with support directly on the computer with paper in front of them to work out their answers. For the state test, that is a little bit different. That one, just because of the significance and the importance, that one, it's a coordinated effort between among administration, technology, the site, to see who's best suited, who's ready with like just getting connected.
I wanted to follow up then on that. Do we see a difference like in our schools on our scores versus kids that do it on paper versus kids who do it on the computer? I mean, even in our state assessments, we have some schools that do paper and some do the computer. I feel like we're not necessarily comparing apples to apples in that, but I could be wrong. So what are you guys noticing?
Well, we can't really compare right now because this is the first time that any students are taking these district tests on paper or online. So we can't really see, would these students have done better on paper or online? We don't know. State test, when the state ran their numbers, they told us, and they're very convinced that there was no difference between students that took on paper and students that took online. And here, even opinions in the district, some people think, yes, there is going to be a difference. Some people think, no, there's no difference. But even with our state test last year in 2022 was the first year we moved more schools online that were on paper. The problem is with everything that had gone on between 2019 and 2022, that's almost impossible to measure would scores have been different given those 2 years of school closures. And so answer is, I don't know, but the state says there is no difference statewide. This year, we are moving 3 more schools online that have been on paper the whole time. We might be able to get a better read on it this year in 2023.
What is the number online versus paper?
This year, it'll be half, 8 and 8.
I don't understand, then why can't you, you've got 8 schools that were paper, 8 schools were online, were the scores different, or are they the same?
Well, compared to how the schools have scored in the past,
No, I'm just saying,
school to school, we always see differences school to school and grade to grade. I mean, there will be differences. It'd be very difficult to say this school and this school should have scored differently had they been in a different administration mode.
you've got the paper scores and you got the online scores.
Mhm.
Which were higher?
I'd have to go aggregate that up.
Okay.
And also we'll have to look at which schools went online and which ones are on paper too. Because there are schools that have different demographics that typically will have lower scores.
I understand what you're saying, Director Owen. It's not an apples to apples comparison. So you can't just remove that variable and be able to identify that that variable made a difference there in particular. So,
But you think you can share maybe some insight with that next year with these schools who are moving from paper now to online,
I hope so. I mean,
since they're going to be doing the same test again, basically. So,
mhm.
okay.
They will be. I hope so. But then again, there's a lot of new in the district this year too. So we're introducing a lot of variables too. And we've had so many variables since the 18-19 school year. Here's what scores look like right now. And the reason I just reiterated the break in consistency over the last 4 years is because we don't really know what these percentages mean right now. The best way to use this is comparatively, which students scored lower, which students scored higher, where were students scoring higher and lower. This is our baseline measure. Use this to start making instructional groups. Who are you going to put in which groups? Here's the demographic comparison.
Sorry, can I ask you another question? This
Yes.
benchmark stuff from the fall, this is basically, we tested kids on standards that they're gonna learn all year, or? So therefore, we would not necessarily expect all our kids to be super high at this point, right?
No, this is percent correct. And this is actually, I mean, it's a different test with different items. That's about where we would see math percentages at the beginning of the year, mid to high 30s across the board typically anyway. So this test may be more comparable to previous tests than we know. Demographic comparisons in math. This is across all grades, kindergarten through 8th. And in reading. So that concludes the data update. This is the new data that we have now. And I wanted to move on to the second part of this presentation because a week from now, districts should be receiving their final A through F letter grades, and then the appeal window should open, and then that gets processed, and then they should go public, I would say probably within a month. But once they're final, and we don't plan to appeal any, if we do, I'm not sure at this point, we're still waiting on some data, then as a district, we can share that at our discretion. There is no embargo like that anymore. So what I wanted to do was if we can come back briefly, maybe next month, we'll still talk about that. I'd like to set up what we might be presenting to you if we bring the school letter grades to you soon and go through the components of this model. It is very similar to how the model has worked in the past. There is kind of one change in the growth calculation, but the way that the growth is used is no different. So these are the components. They look very much the same as they have the last several years. 50% of the overall total points letter grade is growth, 30% proficiency. Our EL population, 10%. And then this section, which we'll get into the components of, acceleration readiness is what they've called it. That's the last 10%. And then there are bonus points that we'll also get into, up to 5. To start with proficiency. Proficiency in this model is weighted. So the overall proficiency rate includes partially proficient, weighted at a 0.6, and includes highly proficient, which is weighted higher at a 1.3. And just mathematically, what that might mean is, this seemed to be just the most easily mathematically calculatable in my head I could do, is if you had a school, say with 10%, 30, 30, 30, 10% minimally proficient, 30, 30, 30, a straight unweighted proficiency rate would come out to 60%. You'd have 30 proficient, 30 highly proficient. A weighted proficiency rate in this case would weight 30% partially proficient at a 0.6, which is 18%, 30% proficient at a 1.0, which is 30%, and then 30% weighted at a 1.3, which would come out to 39%. So the weighted proficiency in that case would be 87% proficient versus 60% in an unweighted situation. And then the way those points work out is they just multiply the proficiency rate times the points. So weighted, that school would receive 87% of the 30 points. They actually calculate this 2 different ways and then compare them. So one of them is just a straight current year, full academic year, which are stable students, non-mobile, weighted proficiency. And then they calculate it again, what they call a stability proficiency, to try to give credit for schools that have students that score higher if they've been in the school longer. So they'll weight students who are continuously enrolled for longer higher. And then they take the highest of the 2. The growth component is also weighted. Growth is measured on an SGP only basis. So this is just a peer-to-peer comparison. They'll take students, look at a similar scoring peer group, and see where each individual student ranks within that peer group, and assign a percentile rank. and then group them into one of three categories, just a third, a third, a third of percentiles into low growth, average growth, or high growth compared to similar scoring peers in the state. And you can see the weights are applied above 1.0, the lower scoring, higher growth. The 50 points are calculated 25 ELA and 25 math. And it's overall, so not by grade. ELL component, that's where 10% or 10 points. There are two components to this. I do want to say, I'm going to use the term proficiency, but I don't mean proficiency on AASA. So for the ELL 10 points, the only test used here is the Azella language proficiency test. So the two components worth up to 5 points each are reclassification, or an ELL student scored proficient, and positive movement across categories. The more proficiency category a student moves, the more points. You have to have 10 or more, which all of our schools do. So they'll all be evaluated on a 100-point scale. The last 10 points is what they call acceleration and readiness. This has several different indicators. And you can get up to 10 points in any of these ways. So for those schools that have eighth grade math can be important. That can yield up to 5 points. Increase in eighth grade math, highly proficient. Decrease in eighth grade math, minimally proficient. Schools that have third grade can earn 5 points by decreasing third grade ELA, minimally proficient. Reduction in chronic absenteeism. The chronically absent student is absent for more than or 10% of the year or more. And then subgroup improvement. This subgroup improvement can yield up to 6 points. And there are, I think, up to about 28 different ways to get points here if you have enough students to be evaluated. So in any of these categories, separate for math and ELA, any improvement in proficiency from prior to current will yield 2 points per category, up to 6. And then the last one here can get 2 points if 9% or more of the total student population is classified as special needs and spends 80% or more of the time in the general education setting.
I have one question about the chronic absenteeism bullet. It says reduction in chronic absenteeism rate or the current rate is less than 4%. So if the rate at the school is less than 4%, you automatically are awarded the points.
Correct.
Or you reduce the rate of just those students or the overall percentage?
Overall percentage.
Okay, so if you reduce your overall percentage of chronic absenteeism, you also get the points. It's either
Yes,
or situation.
correct.
Okay, I
Yep.
understand.
And there is no criteria about how much to decrease. 0.1% will yield the 2 points. And then the very last thing is up to 5 bonus points. There are up to 2 points for a high incidence special education school or greater than a certain percentage of the school's total population. And then there are science proficiency points at or above the state average proficiency, and it's standard deviations 0 if below, 1.5 if at and within 1 standard deviation, 3 if above a standard the standard deviation. We do not have those points yet.
On the special ed, what's the criteria for 1 point, 1.5, and 2?
The percentage of the state rate. So I think the state rate they quoted this year is like 11.52. So 70% of that rate will yield 1.80%. Or no, it goes, let's see, 70, 1.80, 1.5, and 80, above 80, 2 points. So 80% of the state average or higher is full 2 points. And then they add all those points up, and this is the scale the state board approved earlier this month.
Just out of curiosity, have you tried to extrapolate this thing based on what you know?
Well, yes.
Okay, can you tell us what you came up with?
Well, I mean, I could, but I want to wait till they're final because they're still running numbers. And in fact, ADE did another data push today, this morning. It did not impact any of Litchfield's data as I see it right now, but there were schools in the state that it did impact. According to ADE, significantly impacted. So those kinds of things I want to look out for.
You don't want to tell us what you've come up with, but are you feeling optimistic?
Yeah, very
Okay.
highly.
My follow-up question to that is, we will be getting letter grades by school. How does that translate, or does it translate to a letter grade for the district?
It won't this year, but it will in the fall of 2023. The model, the way they have it set up right now, is it will just be for the district. It will be a straight GPA calculation based on the school letter grades. So they would assign 4 points for an A, 3 for B, 2 for C, and then average those points.
So,
And then you have to-
so we will not get a letter grade for our district. However, you could share what it would be when we have all our grades.
Well, we could calculate the GPA.
Yeah, yeah.
But the letter grade is the tricky part, because
Okay.
that, the state will have to look at the distribution of points, and then they'll have to set the cut point. Because the A will depend entirely on where the cut point is set. But when this was a thing, a few years ago, pre the COVID pandemic, it looked like somewhere in the 3.4, 3.5 range would be the cut point for an A. So I would anticipate it being somewhere around there.
So when you bring us the letter grades, I'd love to see a GPA.
Okay.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments from board members?
Just to clarify, you said that we will be able to share that once they finalize them, right? So even though they won't be published through ADE or whatever, we will be able to share that once they're out
Yep,
next week?
there is no legal embargo on us that prevents us as a district sharing that information.
So we'll share that out right away, right? Superintendent Gunning? Okay, good.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank
Thank you for the presentation.
One other follow-up question, and Superintendent Getty might be able to answer this. Since we're doing the district assessments, obviously, we're going to talk about data more, hopefully in November when we talk about the letter grades for the schools. But since we're doing the next step of the district assessments in January, will we see another data presentation in February, or what would the timing of that be? Sorry, Mr. Owen, that I didn't ask you earlier. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
All the years are blending together, so I cannot remember. Fall, winter. Okay. So we wanted to provide a brief update regarding the ESSER grant. So with your feedback, we added back in everything so you could kind of see those pieces. And then also showed the estimated cost on budget side and spent year to date. So there's not a ton of updates. As you can tell in yellow, we're still working on the middle school mental health. They have a team together and they've been meeting, and they definitely have come to some final conclusions on some supports that they can provide. So they were finalizing that at the end of this month to move forward with that. And then the professional development in regards to solution tree related to PLCs. We knew that we had some opportunities since some of the grant funding with things starting at different times. We had additional funding, so we were able to provide more supports in relation to PLCs and bringing additional training in and also coaching alongside of that. If we scroll down, I don't know, my coloring is kind of off on this one, but if we go down To the bottom, you'll see some things in like a rose color, or yeah, soft orange color. Those were some additional ideas since we do have some additional funds setting aside. So talking through the reading endorsement certification and guest teachers for that, since that's a process that we're going through right now. Math supplemental materials for our self-contained classrooms. And then we even talked about even today, like preparing for some math supplements that we'll probably add to this as well for our schools that don't have math specialists right now, right? Preparing ahead of time so that we can have those supplies intact and ready to disperse when needed. And then training for our math specialists, additional Kagan training and CPI training, which is training that we utilize for mainly our self-contained, but also for special needs students. And then if we go down into the ESSER 3, we wanted to show the Mango language, even though we were in our final stages, they would not accept our purchase order, so we had to move on from there. But we wanted to show that that was something that transpired. That does occur periodically. Purchase order tends to be a process that a lot of times it's mainly educational institutions or public institutions utilize. So a lot of companies have been dealing more with private industry and preferred to go with either like checks or credit cards and paying in that manner. Some other areas that we're looking at in this ESSER 3 is homebound compensation, of looking at increases in that. We have a difficulty in finding homebound teachers. Additional certified guest teachers. We do have at least 2 campuses that we would like to add an additional guest teacher to help support because their need is higher. That would be our 2 Title I middle school campuses. 2 special education roving aides. Again, that's an area of need where we need additional supports for absences. It's really hard to provide and meet the needs of the students within those programs when they're short-staffed. And then bringing back the security guards at L. Thomas Heck and Wigwam Creek, as you have seen over the past several months with some increase in discipline, the need in those 2 campuses to bring back those positions. There was something else today that we talked about. So it's continuously changing as we're evaluating the monies. Oh, I know what it was today. So today we just found out a great announcement, but now it's shifting everything that we're doing again. The governor is going to support the Summer Boost program again next year, which is amazing. And now we'll look at the money that we had set aside for summer school again and reevaluate that piece. So I think those are all the main updates there. And so we'll continue to kind of bring it back in this form. So hopefully it's highlighted in easy ways for you to see any changes and updates and a way for you to monitor also the budget components. And I'd be happy to answer any questions in relation to.
I don't have any questions, but I mean, what a terrible problem to have some extra money that we're going to spend on something and now we can use it on something else to help our kids. So terrible problem to have.
That's awesome. And we are still waiting. We have not received, just in case you were wondering, I don't know if you're waiting for this data to come back, but we have not received the data back on the success of the Summer Boost program from the governor's office. So remember, we tracked our own data and tracked the success for our purposes of what we did from a pre and post, but we also had to submit information and survey data to the governor's office. And they were supposed to put together a report, so we're waiting to receive that information. I'm assuming it must have looked great because I couldn't imagine him,
Agreeing
funding
to
it
fund
again.
another round if
right?
it didn't look good. Yeah. So. I had a quick question on the additional certified guest teachers. I think that's a really important addition, especially to the campuses. I know middle school, we struggle all the time, but with those campuses specifically that need it and putting more people there. I notice it says here for fiscal 24. I mean, I know that there's staffing shortages everywhere, but is it possible that you could get them more help this year if that hiring could happen? Or is it something that could really only happen during the next year just based on funding?
We have it slotted for both. So what we
okay.
did was slot it for both fiscal years.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. So if,
Yeah.
if the positions can be filled now, you'll do it and
Yes.
it'll just run through all of fiscal 24. Perfect.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so on the larger of the ESSER three funds, as of right now, we have $1 million that we're not sure what we're going to do with. Is that correct?
Correct.
And approximately how much does the summer school program, how much money does that free up with the governor funding that?
Michael, do you remember that off the top of your head? Let me go back through and see. I know it's-
Approximate's fine.
So
I thought it was.
we spent $500,000 roughly on summer school last year. And so what I had slotted in there was summer school for this year and summer school for next year, basically until the grant is over. So that's $1 million. I would like to clarify what's not in here that we definitely could consider moving into ESSER 3 is positions that are currently supported out of ESSER 2. I did not budget them to continue with ESSER 3 until ESSER 3 expires, if that makes sense. So,
Yep.
so that would eat into the $1 million. As you can see there, we do have a handful of ideas on top of that certainly could use the remaining money. We just hadn't finished full conversations around those topics because what had happened was I was updating ESSER 3. You know, we had planned for a lot of things that either didn't come to fruition or, like the summer school program, other funding had become available. And so we were having a brainstorming session on what that might look like. Obviously, at the time, I didn't have cost estimates for every idea that was thrown out. And so I then had to go back and try to come up with estimates to then figure out how much still remained. And so I just think we have a couple more conversations to have to finalize full recommendations on how to round out the grant, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. I guess my only concern is not the correct word, but I'm going to say concern with that is, you know, when we were given the ESSER funds initially, the board had talked through, you know, a bunch of different ideas and worked in collaboration with Superintendent Gunning on those. And now it seems like there's been shuffling of different things, which I know happens over time, but even though you're updating us on what's happening, it doesn't really feel like there's board input on that, and maybe you don't technically need it. But I just want to make sure that we're all staying in alignment. So I think that's part of the purpose of this conversation. But I want us to, because we used to talk about this every month and then we stopped talking about it every month. And so I don't know that we need to go back to that, but I just want to make sure that the board is fully in support of the allocation of these funds and that the transparency remains really clear on what they're used for. I don't think we're out of alignment, but I just want to make sure that we stay in alignment. Does that make sense to the rest of the board? Okay. One suggestion that I have, and I'll ask if any of the other board members have any suggestions. I know part of what we have asked with the ESSER funds and well, it was with the ESSER funds and we moved it over to capital, was the expansion of our one-to-one technology. And I know that that has been really hard on our tech folks. And I know we have quite a few open positions still. So is it possible to allocate any of these funds to, we don't love stipends, but some sort of stipend or increase the salaries? I think they're going to be part of our entire salary conversation that we're going to have, the compensation conversation that we're going to have at some point here in the next couple of months. But I know every time I get that report from Director Cruz, there's numerous support positions in that department, and I'd like to do what we can to fill that. And maybe ESSER funds are not the answer to that, but that is something that I've been noticing and concerned about that particular department.
Well, one of the continued pieces with our compensation study is we had the vendor update the numbers, and we're actually meeting with him tomorrow to go back through the dashboard with updated information. Because when we looked at the compensation last year, that was last year's data, right? That was like November, December data that we received from school districts and surrounding companies. And we know people have made a lot of changes since then, with increasing funding from the governor, as well as just people and being competitive in the industry. So we'll be reviewing that actually tomorrow, going through it to see which recommendations, because, and actually even looking at the scope of that compensation study, right? Because with that data might shift some of that compensation study timeline and recommendations, things that we may need to make recommendations sooner rather than later.
I have a question, and it's more just strategic, not something we're going to answer tonight, but as you're talking about sort of brainstorming ideas, you're estimating cost, you're talking about moving some positions from different funding and grants, which I think is a great way to elongate our supports and interventionists and things like that. How do we do that, but in parallel also think about what are we going to do in August of 2024, or whenever that time is, right when the clock runs out and we have to say goodbye to those funds. We've spent them all of those grants are gone, but we all know we're not going to want to say goodbye to those positions, the majority of them. There may be a handful of something that does go away, but I can't see us as a board, as a district, your admin staff saying, we just no longer need math specialists. We no longer need 5 additional aides at every camp. I can't see us saying that. So how do we shift and make use of every single dollar we have? And like this new summer school grant, we have all this sort of extra money that kind of piles up and we can utilize that. How do we in parallel start talking about there's not gonna be grant money falling out of the sky in 2 years, but how do we have that strategic thought and say, these are the people that we really need to keep? How do we do that? Because our other funding isn't probably going to increase as much as we need to cover them.
So that's where the scenario planning that we've previously discussed seriously come into play. And it's also where as we're making strategic decisions about budget for the next year, it's not really sufficient to only look out 1 year, because you need to be looking out, those handful of years so that you can plan around those fiscal cliffs, as I called them in my presentation the other night. Honestly, it comes down to allocation decision, right? It's all one pie. And so we can certainly make the strategic decision to continue some of those resources, but depending on how those scenarios end up looking, we may have to ask ourselves what we're willing to give up to keep them. The pie doesn't always get bigger, as you were alluding to. Our funding, inflation adjustments that the state basically have to give us are limited to 2%. That doesn't stop the state from giving us more, but you can't really count your chickens before your eggs hatch, right? So
yeah. Well, no, I think you're that scenario planning, the planning, 2, 3, 5 years out, sort of seeing where those cliffs are and having those internal conversations amongst your admin staff of what are the priorities, what are we willing to allocate. We do have a little bit of extra state funding, and hopefully that will continue, and every fingers and toes are crossed. But how do we best utilize that? Because I think we're going to get really used to seeing those direct interventions and what they're doing and the good work and the increase in our numbers. It's going to be hard for us to say goodbye to that.
The only other thing I would add is that it also means we have to be very strategic on what we choose to use any additional funding that we do end up with in the ESSER funds. So when I rerun the numbers and pull over everything in ESSER 2 into ESSER 3 and take out summer school, as we heard about earlier, there could still be some remaining funds, but as we're thinking about what to use it for, it's important to remain mindful that if you put another continuing resource in there, it's just making that fiscal cliff even harder to then try to decide what to keep and what to ultimately cut. So it's a strategic issue to have both now and in the future. Although, as you alluded to earlier, it's a pretty good problem to have in that we have some funding right now.
Thank
I
you.
think sometimes you have to look at using some of those funds for hard assets that we're not going to lose, right? If we can purchase items and things like that, that's something we get to keep, people we may not. But I think that's also what's going to come into play is us really looking at that information of how have these programs and things that we've put in place, how are they impacting our students? And if we're seeing the benefit of that we want, and we're seeing the higher scores for our kids, then we move things around. And for things that we're not, and even if things are being paid for not out of ESSER funds, there are things that may not be giving us the results we want, then those are the things we look at saying, okay, these are not giving us what we want, so these have to go so that we can keep the things that are giving us the higher results we're looking for.
Exactly. Yep.
As I wanted to add something as a part of our planning, when we're sitting and looking at, we see extra funds or we have this amount here in ESSER, our mind immediately goes to, oh, let's get another math specialist or let's get another aide. And what Michael constantly brings us back is those positions, we're adding positions and then there's a cliff. Like, oh yeah, that's right. So we have to think about, because we always go to people and more interventions and more support, or let's pay these people an additional, amount of money, but there's going to be an end to this. And so that's what Michael has been amazing with our team, like bringing us back to really looking at, let's look at our ROI, but then let's also realize that if we add another position, that's something else at the end that we don't have a sustainable sort of fund for yet. So.
But what I would add to that is the point of the ESSER funds was to get us back to where we were. So there may be some positions that we only need temporarily, and we know that going into it, and we say, we're using these funds that were given to us to close that gap, that learning loss gap, and that can also be part of it, I think, if we go into it knowing that. Because otherwise, we're going to make steady growth. We've seen that we're seeing steady growth, but how long is it going to take us to close that gap? If it's going to take us 3 years to close the gap, then do we want to try to accelerate that by having more people resources during a shorter time, if that's going to be impactful to that? So I definitely want us to be mindful of the conversation we had when we first were given these funds, which is we want every dollar to go toward learning loss. And even though we've seen progress and we've made progress, I don't think that mission has changed at all, because we're still not where we want to be. Any other board member questions or comments on e-learning recovery scorecard update? Thank you, Superintendent Gutting. We will now move on to agenda item 1E, Superintendent Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Goals Update, presented by Superintendent Gutting.
Okay, we wanted to provide an update and revisit our goals that we have set for our scorecard. The first one, just as a reminder, is increase the social emotional skills of our students by committing to the advancement of social emotional learning and effective behavioral supports to foster success in all of our students. So just even from the very beginning of the year, and we did put in our care rooms and have our behavior text, they've already been supporting over 500 students, which is pretty amazing within the first quarter, but we know those needs are definitely there after the pandemic. And then they continue to receive training. In the data component, when you look at the data, I did receive a question from a community member. So I want to kind of touch on this of why we selected this data. And this is just snapshot data. This is the type of data that helps Megan know where to dig deeper and dig down into. So one of the components that we want to look at is attendance. Attendance rate, we know if our students are present and at school, then they'll perform better. So when we look at it, you also want to look at it in comparison to their makeup of their demographic. And you want to just see if there's any disparity. So that's why we utilize percentages, because it's very easy to see if we're seeing any disparities. Are we seeing any subgroup that is having a higher absentee rate than typical or what we should typically see? And then I did want to highlight that our not absent rate, I guess, yeah, attendance rate, sorry, couldn't think of the other word, is at 93% currently. So still maintaining a high attendance rate. There was no red flags really in looking in that area of that data. Then we go into looking at our most recent out-of-school suspension data. And in that, we look at percentages as well. And it's just lining up the out-of-school percentage next to their percent of their group, and to see if there's any disparity there. So as you can see, there are some subgroups that are higher than what their makeup of the population is, as well as seeing, again, the high rate in discipline of our male students. So with that would trigger additional conversations to see, are we seeing anything in particular at a specific school that may need additional supports? Maybe the district behavior coach needs to go out to provide some additional supports. Is there some type of mentoring? We've been talking about different mentoring opportunities, especially for our male students, to hopefully have better connections with their campus and with their fellow students. And then we'll reevaluate that data again, of course, in March. The next goal is increase academic achievement by committing to the advancement of our current programming to foster the success of all of our students. So continuing on with our Kagan professional development, which we had a session back in September, as well as they're also doing coaching sessions. iReady walkthroughs and coachings for all of the schools, solutions tree training by school. So they've been starting to schedule that. And so you can see which schools have already scheduled theirs. Wonders and ELA walkthrough and implementation checklist. So checking to see the implementation process, because we want to know when we get down to the end of looking at the return on investment of these programs, one of the components is looking at how was the implementation done and was it fully implemented? So monitoring that process as well. And then, of course, continuing on with any additional trainings that are needed and working on our literacy endorsements for our K-5 teachers that'll begin in November 2022. That's something that's interesting to me, right? Take things off teachers' plate, but let me just add on one more endorsement to your certification process. And then, of course, another component, I mean, it's a good training, so I'm glad that they're going through the endorsement, but also then having all of our national board certification teachers that are in that cohort and seeing the success of that program and trying to grow that. The next is the attract, recruit a robust and diverse pool of candidates, retain a diverse, talented, and effective staff. These are all of the just places and spaces that our HR department has been able to be, which is amazing. That we didn't even have that many in a one-year time frame. So to see that they're out and about and maximizing every opportunity. The other thing that has been amazing to watch is just the growth of our student teacher program and intern program, and how the HR department is monitoring the effectiveness of those people and making sure that they're in line if they're highly effective in what they're doing as a new person that will be able to direct them to an open position. And then we'd like to show, of course, our staffing data by subgroup. So continue to monitor that as we want to have a staff that represents our student population. And then the final one was to review our current curriculum to ensure it is rigorous, relevant, and representative of our current student population. The math was done in the process of adopting that math curriculum. Of course, it will be ongoing, and we'll be monitoring the effectiveness of that, of bringing on a brand new math curriculum. And same thing with ELA. So now that we're into, what are we, year 3 of ELA? with pandemic years, right? So now it'll be time to really review all of that, those pieces and components as well. We wanted to include, I know this was in Brian's data too, but we wanted you to have it also in one space to look at is our state proficiency data by subgroup. And then, of course, our benchmark data by subgroup. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
I have one request, actually.
Sure.
So in the section where we talk about attract and recruit a robust and diverse pool of candidates, retain a diverse, talented, and effective staff. I understand that the table that's included here is all of our staff. I would like to see our certified teachers separately, I guess, separated out, because from prior information looking at full staff versus teachers, one of the ideas I believe behind this particular goal was so that our diverse population has the opportunity to see themselves not only in all of the staff, but also in teachers reflected. And so I think that when we look at our student population and our staff population, we would see one thing that looks probably more comparable. And when we look at our student population compared with our certified teacher population, it's going to look less comparable. I don't know what the current data looks like, but that would be based on history, likely what that scenario would be. So I want to make sure that we are moving the needle, if you will, on not only our staff and having our entire staff reflect our student population, but also our certified staff as well.
Yeah, we can break that out.
Great, thank you. Any other board member comments? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just had one quick question, and this might be something that you don't have off the top of your head, so you can send later, or just maybe even in the March update potentially is, looking at out of school suspensions. I think you alluded to this earlier with some middle schools struggling this year more with security issues and things like that. In looking at this data, you mentioned sort of, our male students. I mean, clearly it's significantly higher than their percentage of the overall population. So I know part of that is probably age, and there's a lot of factors there, but knowing your exposure to our peer districts, our state, education in general, can you contextualize this a little bit? Is this more normal than it looks? When you look at 90% of our, one student population, it looks alarming, but I'm not sure that it is. So can you, kind of put that more into context than just the numbers?
It definitely mirrors what our surrounding districts are seeing, for sure. We also, all of us in the cohort of superintendents have seen an uptick in out-of-school suspensions for that more hands-on physical interactions that students are having than we've seen in the past. And it's just that transition that we're seeing coming back from the pandemic, of where children were more online or in their homes, and then transitioning back to a social setting. They got very comfortable and used to doing things online and then not having to face people. And they continued some of that online stuff, but now are facing those people that they're talking about and having to really handle some tough situations. So it's not something that, and we've talked numerous times in our monthly superintendent meetings, and it's not something any different than anyone else is seeing. So it is, but it's still too much for me. So for us, the urgency is there, because we've got to help them have some other skills and strategies to handle difficult situations besides how they're doing it.
Right, absolutely. Thank you.
I would still like to see on the out-of-school suspension numbers/percentages.
Okay.
I'd see numbers, because could be, the percentage may seem high, but may only be 10 students. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying that. And also, to go on what Danielle said, middle school probably is I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say a large percentage of these out-of-school suspensions, perhaps as high as 75 to 80%, very similar to what you had in high school.
Right.
Or higher. And the males, that's what you're going to get when these kids hit sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. You know, these kids are anywhere from 11 to 14, sometimes 15 years old. So I don't see, you know, as an educator, a discrepancy there at all. I mean, anything that's odd, it's just unfortunate the way I've seen it over the years.
Any other board member questions or comments on the DEI goals? Thank you, Superintendent Gunning. Board Member Zeidema?
I move to adjourn the study session.
I will second. All those in favor? Aye.
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 This